Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a VP of marketing at Google. He leads brand, product, growth, and performance marketing for some of Google's largest and most strategic products, including Search, Gmail, Maps, News, Google AI, and many others. He started his career in Reebok's marketing team, where he founded Reebok Interactive. Prior to Google, he worked as a marketing director at Nike and Nickelodeon. His name is Marvin Chow. This episode is the first part of the conversation with Marvin. We'll focus on how Marvin started his career in tech and marketing. Welcome to the show, Marvin.
Hi, Grace. Nice to see you. How are you this morning?
Great. Having my coffee right here. Marvin, you grew up in New Jersey, went to school in Boston. To start off the show, can you tell us a little bit more about how you grew up and how you got into tech?
Yeah, thanks. No, thanks for having me on. I mean, I think it's a very long question in the sense that, I took many, many steps to get to where I am today. But, I grew up, back then it was pretty typical. My parents immigrated from China and Taiwan to America for the American dream in the 70s. And then, they had their first child, me, and I was born here. And I grew up in a kind of an immigrant neighborhood for most of my life. Both my parents worked. And I think that, back then it was just whatever you had to do to survive. There was no internet. There was just a lot of random stuff. You tried not to get into trouble. And I was never a great student, which was very disappointing to my Asian parents, but somehow it kind of all worked out. But yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, went to school in Boston, and then after that have had a chance to kind of live all over the world, which has been great.
Yeah, totally. Is there any particular experience that shaped who you are today or any super memorable story about growing up?
They're not really stories. I think once again, growing up with immigrant parents, you grew up differently in America back then. We moved a lot when I was little. I think my parents were always getting new jobs and trying to move to a better house, to a better life. And I eventually end up in a really nice suburb in northern New Jersey. So I think moving a lot, I learned to adapt a lot, like a new school every year, every 2 years for the first, 10 years of my life. That was a big deal. I think, with typical, Asian parents, it was a lot of pressure. I think, and when I got to college, I got a level of independence, which I really respected, and you really used it a lot to find kind of the non-traditional things that I think would shape my life, whether it be politics or social issues or even marketing. I think marketing for my generation, it wasn't a normal field to go into. And so things like that and storytelling, I really started to discover when I was much older in life, I would say, more like in college than I think most kids today.
Yeah, you work at many of my favorite brands, Reebok, Nickelodeon, Nike, Google. Those are some really competitive companies to get in, and you end up succeeding in all of these top companies. What would you say are 3 characteristics that make you more successful than your peers?
I don't know if I'm more successful, let's say that. I think like everyone else, I think there's a lot that I'm still trying to learn and do. So, I think it's a good question. I don't know. I think that for me, people that are just genuinely curious about how things work, why things are a certain way, they ask a lot of questions. I think curiosity is just something that I think everybody, it benefits so many people. And it's funny, I have 2 young daughters, and the kinds of questions they ask are really funny, and they kind of drive you crazy because they're like, why is it like this? And you're like, I don't know. You're like, just stop asking. But it's a very, very good trait to have, as a child, as an adult. So there's a natural curiosity. And I think even in the early days, it's what led me into tech. I think tech was very new. It's like, well, why is it like this? What could be possible? So I think that's maybe one area. I think another area which we talk a lot about is kind of there's a lot of work like growth mindset or like self-learning, whatever you want to call it. But I think that, I have a genuine really understanding that like, I'm far from perfect. Like, those things I can learn, like even in our first couple conversations, like how you think about startups and how different people think about the world and how new generations think about where things are going. There's just always more to learn, whether it's about a technology, about a generation, about a country. And I think that I just like learning, and I'm really not ashamed to really not know something, which I think in a lot of spaces, like when you get really senior, you have this pressure that you should know everything. And I think that having that kind of mindset of just being open to learning new things, I think serves you really, really well, particularly as the world evolves. I don't know. I mean, those are two out of three. That's pretty good. How about that?
Yeah, I love it. I think many of the guests on the show mentioned that curiosity was one of their biggest traits.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say another of your characteristics is that you're super humble. Similar to the second point you mentioned, I like that you're constantly learning a bit from probably everyone you met. That just gave you an edge to gather information from different perspectives, which I believe will make you even more successful. I feel like that's maybe one of the characteristics that you didn't notice.
Oh, no, it's fun. I mean, it's interesting. Like, one, I think the more you surround yourself with people that know a lot of things, it's like easier to be humble. I would say that's one. But then also, like, even going back to your previous question, like, when I first moved overseas, Korea was the first country I lived in. I didn't speak Korean, and I think you're in where you're smart, but you don't even know how to like order food in a restaurant or like get on a subway. And so I think there's a lot of things in your life that will kind of continue to reinforce humility, just because it's a big world, and I think the more you look at yourself as a part of the world versus a part of your community or your cohort, you realize everything that you don't know.
Yeah, totally. There are just so many things to be learned from different people. Immerse yourself into the culture is definitely a great way to learn new things. I feel like learning should be happening all the time instead of just in school. The other day, I was listening to your talk on BC Media's alumni's YouTube channel. You mentioned about some alumni created an alcohol delivery app, which is great. However, you wish more people could be inventing things to addressing social issues, such as feeding kids in Africa, leaving a legacy to address these bigger issues in the society. I feel like these are definitely things more people should be thinking about. How do you educate yourself on these important social matters?
That's a great point. I mean, that was a conversation, I had even early on when I met Father Leahy, he wasn't the president when he wasn't the president of Boston College when I was there. He's the president now. And I think, we talk a lot about, how does Boston College as a smaller college kind of excel? And I think to your question, a lot of my, kind of discovery of social issues came from college. And once again, growing up in the time that I grew up and growing up with immigrant families, unfortunately, even we talk a lot about this with racial justice. When you immigrate from another country to America, you really are just focused on survival. You can't focus on opportunities, you can't focus on the environment, you can't focus on all these other things because you're just focused on your own immediate family survival. And I think that part of the gift that my parents gave me was the ability to start at a point where I'm more comfortable, raise my kids so they're conscious about, things like the environment or racial justice, things like that. And so, it's not educating. I think it's just, part of society. I think, you watch the news, you talk to interesting people, you read books. I think obviously in the last 6 months during the pandemic, both racial justice and the environment, especially with the election coming up, have taken center stage. But these are issues that I think people should know about regardless of the time. And I think they should discuss them and debate them and think of new ways. And I think one of the best things, I've worked in technology from a core point of view for 10 years. And I think when you think about the problems that technology can help solve over the next, decade, multiple decades, it's going to be around big horizontal issues like social issues in the world. And that's the hope, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure you acquired a lot of different thoughts or opinions from some great people. Who is on your personal board of advisors for career advice or life decisions?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't really, yeah, I've heard this concept before. I don't really have a formal board of advisors, I'd say, like a lot of people like you today. I mean, for me, I mean, honestly, like, in the most recent, 15 years, it's been my wife. I think she knows me the best. She has great perspective on the world. She is very grounded that I am not, important person at work or something. She's very grounded in that. So I think the advice is very, and she's always right. Quite honestly, most nine times out of 10, she's always right. And so, I mean, honestly, like I remember when I was interviewing, I was at Nike and I was interviewing at Google. It was maybe it was like a 6 or 7 month interview process, which was very, very long. And after the first like 2 meetings, we were talking. She's like, "Yeah," she's like, "You should go to Google." And this was early. This was like 2009, 2010. And I was like, "Well, what do you think? We should meet someone." She's like, "No, you should just go to Google." And then like 6 months later, it was like, "Yeah, you were right. We should just go to Google," and it worked out. And so she's definitely very high on my list. I think professionally, it's very situational. I mean, I think Davide Grasso, who was the former CMO of Nike and my boss, we're still very close. And I think I call him a lot just to talk and not when I need advice, but to get perspective on things. Same with Trevor Edwards, who was the CMO and then eventually the president of Nike. Like these are two people that I really consider people that I go to for counsel on various things. And then even people like currently, like my boss now, Lorraine Toohill, who's the CMO of Google, like obviously not about if I'm leaving Google, which I don't plan to do, but I think talking about your career and about like work and things like that, I think she has such a unique perspective, very different than my Nike mentors in that sense. And one time we actually had dinner one time with Davide, who was at the time he was the CMO of Nike, and then Lorraine, the CMO of Google, my former boss and my current boss, and the three of us had dinner. And it was like really awkward to have those kind of worlds collide, but it was funny. And kind of we're colleagues and fun and friends and things like that. But I think a lot of them just end up being former bosses, I would say. Executive coaches in the past here and there, but it's very situational for me. Depends on what I'm trying to think about. Like if I'm investing in a company or advising, I'll maybe call someone else with a different perspective versus a career question or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You put yourself in a great position that you can easily have access to world leaders in the marketing space. There are so many people working at iconic companies like Nike and Google. How do you rise up quickly to where you are today? Do you think it was more depends on the technical skills or soft skills? What do you think was the quote unquote secret sauce for you to achieve a certain level of success at a young age?
Definitely not young. I just look younger. I mean, nowadays it's so different. I mean, Google's a very young company, and people say this all the time. Like, I'm constantly surprised by how bright and how, kind of aggressive and how proactive like this generation is. I think that almost to a degree, like we tell a lot of people coming up that they not to be so focused or planned about their career. I think a lot of these people coming up, at least that we meet, they're very like, well, here's where I want to be in 3 years. Here's where I want to be in 5 years. Here's what I want to be in 7. And that works for a lot of people. That's not me, and I think that I would not have gotten to where I am if I had that plan because I didn't take that path. So I think one, not overly focusing on your career and thinking about like how you do good work and how you continue to learn. I think these are important. I think soft skills, hard skills. I mean, it depends. Like I'm a big fan of leaning into the things that you're good at. If you're really good at certain things, like don't try to always improve everything else, but lean into what you're really good at because as you get more senior, that will be valuable. But still like, being well-rounded and, thinking about the soft skills around, curiosity, like we talked about earlier, like leadership and humility. These are really, really important skills. I think that as you depending on your company, as you move forward, I think will carry you. Because as you get more and more senior, it's not, as you said, it's not just about knowing your job. It's not about your functional skill. It's how you work with other people. It's how people want to work with you or how people want to work for you. Like a big indication when you're older or more senior is, how well you attract talent, and things like that. You always don't want to work for the smartest person. You want to work for the best person. So all these things over time, I think you want to work on, but I think as much as you can try to make it come organically in how you choose roles and how you choose managers. I think this is maybe one way to think about it, I guess.
Totally. You had a great career in Reebok, Nickelodeon, Nike, Google. What do you see as an opportunity in each company when you are trying to figure out your next career move? Since they're in very different industries, sports, entertainment, not tech, what technical skills do you have to actively learn to get into some of the most competitive companies?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, it's not to get into the companies maybe, but it's to do well at them, I would say. Like I remember even early on in my career when I left Reebok, it was my first job. And I was like, I really wanted to understand, I really thought it was important that as a marketing person, you understand finance, you understand how budgets are spent, you understand how revenue happen. And this is very common nowadays, but I would say like when I was out of college, like it was much rarer, I would say. And I remember because I wanted to go to a startup, I wanted to run a startup. And my roommate at the time was a finance manager. He was a finance manager at Reebok, actually. And like every Wednesday night, we would have like finance school. Like he would pull out all his old books and he would teach me about P&Ls and about like accruing and about like how ROI is calculated and incrementality and like just to be able to read a P&L and understand like how the marketing gets used and how it gets accounted for and to be able to have a semi-intelligent conversation with a CFO or a head of finance is something that I wanted to learn, and he taught me that. That was very intentional. And I went on to, be CEO of a startup. I went on to work for an e-commerce retailer that Michael Jordan and John Elway started. And that served me very well because I understood a little bit more now what we think of as like direct response marketing in that sense. And so that was a good pillar. I think in other areas, like every company you go to, you have to learn their industry. Like when I went to Nickelodeon, it was like, I have to learn how TV work and like what's a PUD and a HUD and like how do they think about TV and so that's pretty common. But I think having foundational skills and having like first principles of how you apply these things is kind of really, really important. I would say, moving internationally, you have to learn other things. It's not like, once again, it's a little bit more the soft skills. You have to learn about like how leadership works in those countries, like how language works. You have to be more grounded in research and insights. Like I kind of always tell people, like when we talk, I say like, if I asked you to market, I don't know, like a new phone in America, like you know how to do it. You know what kids watch, like what channels they use, everything where they buy phones. If I said market that same phone in Turkey, you have no idea, and that's what it's like. You have to then be able to trust like the research and the insights to come up with a plan. And I think moving internationally, you learn to not just rely on what you know inherently, but you rely on the data says or what the research says, which I think is really important. And then that goes to generation. Like just because you're young doesn't mean you know what Gen Z thinks. You have to talk to them, you have to research them, you have to understand them so that you understand what their motivations are and things like that, I guess.
Absolutely. I think this is such an incredible tip. I like that you're intentionally doing a lot of the learning on your own to study the foundation of the business. I was wondering, how do you apply the learning onto your day-to-day job? I'm trying to understand how deep you need to go into the knowledge. Do you think the benefit of learning is mostly you could be able to communicate with people in other departments, like the finance department, so you could speak their language? Or do you think you need to be able to bake the learning into the marketing strategies?
I mean, I think if I understand the question, it's not, I think that from the outside world, I think that, like these kind of jobs look like they're very like the movies, like we sit in a room and we come up with strategy and it's like, it just kind of doesn't work that way. I think it's like everything, is so fluid. It's so organic. It's so chaotic. I think when you get like COVID, like no one predicted COVID. Like for the first like 30 days, it was just like everyone was trying to figure it out. Obviously, like the various governments around the world are putting regulation together. Like no one's prepared for these things. And so it's just more like when you're having these conversations to be able to have a different perspective on the world and different experiences. And, I have a couple of experiences, the beauty of Google is, everyone is so just curious and has such a broad level of thinking that you sit in a room and people have perspectives from different industries or different points of views on business models and things like that, that those conversations kind of come together and it becomes the best of a lot of people's thinking in that sense. And so, and the other side of it is like occasionally you will get like, you know, that small strike of like inspiration where it's like, oh, you'll read an article about something or you'll see a new technology and you'll start to understand like how these things start to apply to what you're working on. Like, you know, like we talked earlier, I mean, like I love technology and new apps. You know, I think, you know, things like TikTok or Toutiao, like I'm on these things super early, not because just to use them, but to just understand like how they're thinking about building a product. And I think, you know, we look at it so much, like so much of innovation coming out of Asia is so interesting because it's unlike America, sometimes it's a hybrid of technology innovation, but also business model innovation. They rethink about like how the business model of things. And so these are things that just like, you know, having a little bit of knowledge across a lot of people creates like this informed point of view and it's like Google. So yeah, so it's not like, it's less formal than that. You know, it's definitely not that glamorous. A bunch of people on a video conference being like, what about this? Or how about this? You know, like, so I mean, it works out, and it obviously it's thoughtful, but at the same time, it's not like the movies, I think, or Mad Men.
Yeah, Mad Men. That's what I was picturing. There's probably a lot of myths around how people actually work in tech. What is a typical day for you as a vice president at Google? I assume there's a lot of meetings. How do you structure your day?
It's a lot of meetings. I mean, it's not that glamorous. I mean, it's like a job. So I mean, like, it's a lot of meetings. So it's, you know, I carry, you know, to my assistants, you know, frustration. I carry a lot of meetings. I probably carry 20 to 22 meetings a day. Wow. So it's a lot of fast meetings. There's a lot of, every meeting's like, you're my longest meeting of the day of an hour. Like most of my meetings are half an hour. Some of my meetings are 15 minutes. So it's a very high velocity of meetings. What I find interesting, like it goes a little bit adjacent to your question, what's interesting about technology companies different than Nike, like other companies like Nike, sports companies or entertainment companies have a natural annual rhythm, like holidays coming or the Super Bowl is on this day or the Olympics are every 4 years or the All-Star game, whatever it is, there's a gate that's coming that you have to hit. In a technology company, there's no gates. I mean, holiday is a gate, but like there's no forcing function. So you create a lot of artificial forcing functions, and those are like reviews or launches. So you're always like sprinting towards something. And so my day is like half sprinting towards a handful of launches or reviews or planning periods. And so there's just a lot of meetings to like review things, prepare things, and iterate on things. I think there's a lot of like, you know, I mean, a big part of being a manager is like, you know, people management. There's a lot of time with my team and my leads. There's a lot of time interviewing. There's a lot of time mentoring people, like, you know, meeting new people and that. And then occasionally we'll find time to just like think and write, you know, like, you know, I still to, you know, write plans or still need to think about different approaches to things because and as you get more senior, a lot of the work gets farmed out to your teams and they're great, but still like you have ideas and you have thinking. So you need to kind of write those things down. But yeah, it is a lot of meetings. It's nonstop in that sense. And I think you know, I think we were joking the other day, someone's like, yeah, you know, I feel like I've been saying it's been really busy for like 6 months. And I was like, I feel like I've been saying it's really busy for like 10 years. Like it's just, it never stops. But it's the beauty of, I mean, it's what I love. I mean, like the challenges you see at a company like Google are just like, you know, unparalleled to so many other companies. You know, you don't learn about it. You don't learn about any of it in school. Like, you know, I got to lead our COVID response. I got to be one of the leads of our COVID response at the company level. And it's like, nobody teaches you how to deal with a pandemic. Like, you know, it's just like, so things like that are like really kind of, they're hard, but they're very special. They're the things that like, you know, the experiences that where you work at, you're lucky enough to work at a company that can help people. It's kind of, it's special.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually sounds like an exciting experience. Even the work schedule is crazy, but not many people can experience that much of impact for work in life. How do you come up with a vision or a KPI for yourself? How do you evaluate the result of your work or your team's effort?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our team, so I run, marketing for most of the consumer apps at Google. So everything from search to assistant to maps and things like that. So in a lot of ways, the objectives of our team are very aligned to the objectives of the company. And so I'm lucky, I guess, in the sense that I don't really create special objectives really that for my team or anything like that, or have a strong kind of, not that I went on team goals. I think we have goals as a team, but I think the highest level goals that I think everyone needs to feel a part of is are they a part of the company's goals? And I think when you look at the company's goals around search or artificial intelligence or around shopping, we are very much a core part of those goals. And so we kind of just use the company's goals essentially in that sense. And so that's very easy. And then there's a lot of detail underneath that around how we want to do it and how we maintain, good collaboration and good mental health and all the things that are necessary to enable us to reach those goals. But I think at the highest levels, we kind of just rely on the company's goals to make sure that we are doing the right things.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. In the next episode, we'll learn more about Marvin's perspective on building strong brands. Don't forget to come back on Wednesday for the second part of the conversation with Marvin. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Beside LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com, click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.